All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are going to hear from DEC Watershed Management Division Rivers Program. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Sheldon and committee. Thanks for having us here. Been a couple of years since I've sat in the seat. I feel like I'm a little bit overdue. For the record, I'm Rob Evans. I manage the Rivers Program in the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation, Watershed Management Division, kind of a Russian nesting doll, isn't it? I've been in this position for about 6.5 years, but I've been in the Rivers Program since 2007. Prior to taking this position, I served as the state's floodplain manager and National Flood Insurance Program. I brought with me today a key colleague, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks. So in that nesting doll, I'm right under Rob as the lead river management engineer. I supervise 4 other engineers throughout the state. So we're a team of 5 that manage permit authority for in-stream work across all the service lines. They're all right streams at this time.
So for starters, I think it's good to look at when we think about stream alteration regulation, what triggers jurisdiction. This isn't the verbatim language, it's the plain text attempt from statute, which is the excavation or fill of 10 or more cubic yards of infilling material in a water course that requires a permit from JERM's program. Water course, when you look at the definition, is all perennial streams. I've underscored a water course because that perennial determination, whether a stream is jurisdictional or not, is what is a real challenge for us, having lived with that as the trigger for a decade and a half. Thinking about the proposal in H 632, why do we want to change the jurisdiction back to a drainage area threshold like it originally was? A Venn diagram is a good framework because there are multiple interrelated pieces. The reason, first and foremost, is regulatory certainty and predictability. I think everybody agrees, whether you're a regulator or a landowner, a municipal official or a consultant, everybody likes to know when a permit is required or not, and have that clarity. This would provide that clarity that we don't have present. Related to that, it would allow us to more effectively and efficiently protect the river resource that is under our jurisdiction, which is really related to the manageable workload. JERM's team is spread way too thin. We're on the verge of burnout pretty much every year. After the 24 floods and peak flood recovery, we had a river engineer resign due to stress and just being overworked. So we really want to optimize the program that we have under our responsibility. So what I'm going to walk you through here. Oh, you have a question?
Not knowing this term, backward drainage area threshold, could you just talk a little bit about what that means?
I can. I have some images.
Oh,
We'll
you
get into
do?
that a
Oh,
little bit
okay.
more.
I can wait then.
Sure, but it's really thinking about at what point is a river draining a certain landmass upstream of it. If you went down to the Winooski River right here and said, what's the drainage area? You'd say, oh, it's, 200 square miles. I don't know if that's the number, but so the amount of land draining to that point is 200.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's the contributing watershed, that landmass where runoff from precipitation drains on the surface through groundwater to our rivers and streams.
Great, thank you.
Sure, and it might become a little clearer when we look at some maps here shortly.
Can you give us an acreage for that number? Since we mostly I don't think in terms of square miles.
320.
320 acres.
That's that half square.
At a half square mile, that's a square mile is 604.
Yes. So the previous threshold was 6,400.
Sorry, was what?
The original threshold was 6,400 acres.
Oh, before Irene.
So what I'd like to do here with the next few slides is just kind of walk you through kind of a time step sequence from original jurisdiction to kind of where we are now, of how jurisdiction changed and related workload changed. So the original jurisdiction was water courses with watershed areas greater than 10 square miles. If you map that out statewide, that was a little over 2,000 miles of river and stream. For the 3 engineers that we had under that jurisdiction, that equated to about 667 miles of jurisdiction per engineer. This is Northfield. I'd love to show you a statewide map with streamlines on it. It'd be a jumbled mess given the density of streams. So we picked Northfield as a classic representative of Vermont town with a river running through their village center and town center. The original jurisdiction is that red line you see there, which is the main stem of the Dog River, along with the lower reaches of a few contributing tributaries there. So that red line segment, so you see there, that's the original jurisdiction where if you are moving 10 or more yards of material, you need a permit from our program. If you're doing in-stream work along those blue lines, permit not required. We would still provide technical assistance to anybody that asked, but there was no permit required. And again, just reminding of the numbers there. That's the original jurisdiction. Along comes in 2010, Act 1-2. Well, let me just back up. I mean, I think it's fair to say that stream alteration under that construct left a lot of stream miles with no regulation. And there was a legitimate gap that could and perhaps should have been filled and was filled. And it was filled with Act 110 in 2010, where it removed that drainage area threshold to water courses. And again, water courses as defined in statute and in our rules is a perennial river or stream. That was a 10-fold increase in jurisdictional stream miles, whether you look at it statewide or on the per engineer basis. A significant increase, and we didn't get any more staff to really manage that expanded work at the time. I show 3 engineers there. When it was signed into law, we actually had 2 engineers. We were under a hiring freeze from the financial crisis. We had a retirement of one of our engineers, and we couldn't fill that position. So when this went into effect, we only had 2 engineers to cover the entire state. So with Act 110, 2010 changed to perennial stream miles, it's essentially every blue line. Not every blue line triggers jurisdiction, but when you get up higher in the watershed, the only way to know if it's perennial is to do a site visit. And that's where Jaren's team spends an inordinate amount of time, is going out there to look at the physical indicators and determine, is a permit needed for this project or not? And it's not just the small headwater blue lines on here, it's even streams that aren't mapped. I mean, he gets calls, his team, they get calls to come and look at streams draining hundreds of a square mile, 15 or 20 acre watersheds. So it's kind of jurisdiction, and you see here I label as 23,000 plus stream miles. And it's really jurisdiction and jurisdictional determinations is perhaps how I should have labeled that. We know for certain that, the Winooski River, the Dog River is jurisdictional, but you get up into those smaller headwater streams, it's just not clear without getting out in the field. And then comes Act 138 in 2012. Some of you or all of you may recall there was a lot of emergency work done after that devastating flood. There was overworking, over dredging of miles of stream that we had no authority to regulate. Towns have the ability under their public safety powers to do emergency work, to open roads back up, so emergency vehicles can pass. We had no ability to regulate that work. And so there are a lot of miles of river that were left in a much more unstable and dangerous condition. So the General Assembly responded to that with Act 138 and gave us those emergency authorities. We now have, if you look at our stream alteration rule and our general permit, they're under the headings of emergency protective measures and next flood measures. On average, that these days is about half of the authorizations and permits we issue. So basically a doubling of our permitting activity as a result of Act 138. The good news is we did get 2 new staff. Jaren was one of those hires, so that was definitely helpful. So again, you're still looking at all the blue lines on the map as a potential universe of jurisdiction or making jurisdictional determinations. We're not at 7,000 plus miles per engineer. We're at 4,600 miles per engineer. We try to make the districts for each engineer about equal in size. And then we have a really important thing that came along in 2017, something that we really lobbied as a state for. Our agency, along with VTrans and Vermont Emergency Management, really pushed FEMA to acknowledge the stream alteration rule as what FEMA calls codes and standards. That has real important bearing on town reimbursement from flood, I mentioned flood recovery as it relates to public facilities. The Public Assistance Grant Program, it's a FEMA pot of money when there's a federal declaration that's administered by Vermont Emergency Management. For decades, the baseline for that program was to just replace things in kind, put back what was there, whatever was damaged, put it back just the way it was. But they have a provision that says that the state has adopted higher standards statewide, and they enforce those uniformly. FEMA will pay to meet those higher standards. In 2017, our Secretary Moore got the letter from FEMA saying, after we made some surgical adjustments to the rule and our general permit, we approve of the stream alteration rule as codes and standards. So a good thing for towns, you know, if a 4-foot culvert gets destroyed and it's undersized, and Jaren's rule standards say it needs to be a 12-foot culvert, FEMA will pay for that. So that's a boon to put more resilient infrastructure in after the flood versus the same undersized, not so resilient infrastructure. The challenge, though, that stacked additional process on Jaren's team. For years after one flood declaration, let alone multiple, there's a really iterative process that goes back and forth with towns and Vermont Emergency Management and FEMA to develop projects, what's eligible, what's the cost, and Jaren's permit, when it's primarily for stream crossing structures, Jaren's permit is really needed to paper the FEMA files. And so there's just a tremendous amount of process and coordination engendered in the FEMA approval. And Jaren can correct me here, but I think over the last 2.5 years since the first big 23 flood, he's met just about weekly with FEMA staff to talk about projects. So just to kind of step back, expansion of jurisdiction from 2,000, 23,000-ish miles that we're dealing with. Act 138, emergency work, emergency permitting authority that doubles our permit volume on average. And then on top of that, the FEMA approval.
Yeah, for a little additional context, that the tail end of the FEMA process is heavily skewed. So the 2 examples are yesterday, I helped close out a project from April 2015 or 2016. And that hopefully will make the town of Bethel whole. But for Irene and those larger scale disasters, we didn't close out Irene until May of 2023. So there's a large amount of, I don't want to say padding the file, but making sure the records are in order when it comes to flood recovery work and making sure towns can be reimbursed for the expenses that are there. They incur.
So that kind of brings us to present day request in H632, which is to go back to a drainage area threshold that's clear, to remove the tremendous amount of site visits and activity around very small streams. Not put it back to a 10 square mile drainage area threshold, but put it at a 0.5 square mile, 0.5 square mile threshold. This is what that would look like in Northfield. Not only the red lines from the original jurisdiction, but those black lines. Those are those reaches of tributary draining between 0.5 and 10 square miles. So what is left for us to not be worried about making jurisdictional determinations, all the tails of those blue lines high up in the watershed. And again, just as it was with the original jurisdiction, it's not to say that we wouldn't be providing tremendous amount of technical assistance to landowners or anybody that asks, but we could just clearly say, you know, permit isn't required from us. This is what you want to do. We advise you do this. There's all sorts of technical guidance for myriad project types that we provide folks. So that's what we're proposing. Just quickly, and in terms of stream mileage, you know, it collapses it down to about 10,500 and then reduces that load on each engineer proportionally. this is just perhaps maybe a helpful leave behind if you want to review this after today's testimony. It just collapses down all the slides I just walked through into a timeline. And we thought it perhaps beneficial to superimpose the number of declarations we've had over the last decade and a half. We have a lot, Jaren's team has a lot of lived experience trying to make this work. And so again, we don't come here, hastily. We know it's a significant request, but we think it's best for a most effective, efficient, and clear program going forward. And this just in similar fashion, just kind of stacks kind of the jurisdiction in terms of stream miles through time. What we're asking for there, for far right in the red box. At this point, I'm going to hand over kind of the mic, as it were, to Jaren. He's got a few slides to walk through. Again, he has the lived experience. Want to pause before he takes over. Any questions you may?
Yeah, I think we'll have a few questions. Representative Chapin and then Sadko is.
Thanks for the overview to orient us of the history and this particular request. I guess I'm hearing everything based on workload and practical measures around how to do the regulatory work. I'm not really hearing any justification about what's best for our rivers and all the benefits that the regulatory mechanism, like weighing the pros and cons. Obviously just workload, if we're not giving you the right staff amount and we're not authorizing the right budget, then because I'd love to hear an ecological argument about why this is the right threshold of regulation, why things in my mind is going to, why isn't there a general permit for all the other ones that you don't do individual permits for? Wouldn't that be, don't we want to make sure best practices are being utilized on all of those waterways? So where's the right balance of how much your team engages with any particular project? So I'm asking for more of an ecological argument.
No, I think you raise a very good point. I want to be very clear that we're not trying to devalue the importance of small headwater streams. They are very important, right? Again, I just would say, what is the right regulatory tool to protect those? Is it stream alteration? Then there is a staffing question there, because even general permits need to be administered by somebody, right? And if we're keeping it a perennial, there's still a warm body that needs to make those determinations for permit requirements. I would just offer that there are other regulatory mechanisms both in place. It's a bit patchwork, mind you, that do protect small streams. Act 250 under criterion 1E for those higher up in the watershed or larger developments. Fish and Wildlife makes comments under criterion 1E streams. So Act 250 currently protects them. Our municipal roads general permit has requirements for small streams in terms of culvert sizing. When we're talking about transportation infrastructure. Go ahead, Jaren.
4607 under Title 10 prevents any sort of fish passage barriers and is regulation of streams perennial and not by our colleagues in Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife's unique statutory authority to protect streams with an ecological lens specifically.
I'd say the argument we're trying to make here is a bureaucratic argument more than anything else. And it's not just a matter of our workflow, right? It's very much a matter of regulatory clarity first.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for is, in general, streams of this size just either have so few projects or the projects are so small or like they don't really warrant this level of oversight and regulation. That would make me much more interested in it. Otherwise, it feels a little bit like that 0.5 is, again, sort of arbitrary and just done on a workload basis. And then I would ask, well, why don't you ask for the budget and the staffing that really matches what you see as the best way to protect and guide projects in our rivers. And I guess obviously that's a pie in the sky way to approach things, but it is sort of generally the way I'd like to start. So I guess it feels really missing in this.
So the 0.5 square miles is not arbitrary. That was initially developed under the first stream alteration rule, speaking to 1021. That was a consensus with our colleagues in Fish and Wildlife is below that threshold. We were not seeing fisheries resources by and large. It also matched up fairly consistently with the USGS assessment on what would be a perennial stream or not. So the idea of that being the threshold we're going to is historically that's where it has been regulated or suggested to be regulated and agreed upon at the rule level. However, because of the way it's written in statute, we can't implement that, and we are kind of having a bureaucratic tail wagging the dog, keeping us out there and doing these sort of activities.
That's helpful additional information. Thank you.
Can you mention that USGS threshold one more time?
So that was at the time of the initial rule, which was 2000.
13 was the initial rule. We had a general permit from Act 110, but the rule was 2013.
So that was the USGS perennial stream determined. Yeah.
They did a logistic regression kind of study analysis, kind of, which is presence absence, kind of a binary study. I can send a link to the report or the report itself to perhaps post alongside the slide deck here, where they looked at perenniality because they wanted to attribute that map layer with that information in the background, the likelihood of it being perennial or not. So you see kind of a drop off at those thresholds of half a square mile, as I recall. One last thing, kind of going back to the fact that, there are other mechanisms to protect small streams. I don't know if you've been tracking the Land Use Review Board's development of the Tier 3 critical resource areas. It's proposed and it's still early, I get it, but one of the critical resource areas they've defined as headwaters. So looking at first and second order streams, not drainage area, but those initial first and second order streams where you have initial concentrated flow overlain with soil type and steep slopes. So headwaters is at least on the table there for Act 250 as an additional unique trigger beyond the existing triggers. Thank you for the question. No, that's, again, one thing I want to be clear about is we're not trying to devalue by way of this proposal the importance of small headwater streams. We get it.
I have a question. If you consider, it strikes me that 10 yards of material out of a tiny stream has a much bigger impact than 10 yards of material out of one of our larger rivers. And so have you talked about or considered a scaled approach to jurisdiction in terms of the amount of impact related to the size of the stream?
Interesting. I have not. I don't know if that's something you've noodled, Jaron, but that's an interesting thing to consider.
It's something we've given a very cursory thought to, and that would increase the number of projects that are regulated. So,
Well, not necessarily. It depends. I mean, I think linking it to impact, there's some logic there. Because taking 10 yards out of one of even the ones that you're proposing to scale down to may have a much more significant impact than 10 yards out of the main stem of the Winooski.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's a good point.
and I'd love it if you would think about that and potentially, building off of Representative Chapin's point of what's the ecological impact of the activity on the, relative to the size of the stream. And I would love it right now if you would characterize, if it's possible, the types of activities that you're seeing in these smaller streams. Is it mostly town road projects? Is it driveways, dams? What are we seeing?
So when we're speaking about crossing structures, is primarily it's essentially all transportation infrastructure, whether it's public or private. A large amount do fall to municipalities, and that's where we have that additional public assistance overlay as far as responsibility to make sure we get downstream first. But it's a lot easier to cross a 6 foot wide stream than it is to cross the main stem of the Winooski. So we are seeing much more private infrastructure on these smaller streams proportionally than on larger ones as well.
And what is the requirement of the town if they are simply replacing infrastructure or even increasing a capacity on an existing crossing, at an existing crossing? Do they need a new permit from you?
So it's a construction permit. Is how the general permit is administered. So if it is moving more than 10 yards for that construction activity, it does require authorization for the general permit rule in general. But yeah, so a replacing a crossing, i.e. putting in a new structure is almost always going to meet that cubic yard threshold.
Thinking about these small streams, there's also the kind of restoration projects that are proposed, a common project type that's really spinning up. And I think you've taken testimony perhaps from the Nature Conservancy on strategic wood addition projects. Often those are proposed on some of these smaller reaches of stream, and they currently often need a stream alteration permit. Removing that would allow some of these restoration projects to move forward without that extra process and delay of getting a permit from us. So there's kind of a flip side. I think you bring up a great point about kind of scale of 10 yards on a small stream. There's also activities that could move forward to restore some of these headwater areas unimpeded should we move to a threshold cutoff.
We did take testimony yesterday, not from the Nature Conservancy, but from VNRC's dam restoration or removal person. And they're interested in a streamlined review process. And I guess I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but we were sort of noodling on if that made sense, what direction would it go? And it seemed like maybe, one idea was to have a team at ANR DEC that was used to reviewing those types of projects, as opposed to having them just whatever district they were in and having to get up to speed with the permit issuer. Not, y'all don't have as many, but other divisions may have more staff doing reviews for permitting. Like, if you're not prepared to comment on thoughts on that, I'd be curious what your perspective was on the approach to addressing restoration projects broadly within the permit review process.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak specifically to that bill proposal. My leadership is still reviewing it, considering it. So I'm not sure what the agency posture is going to be yet, quite frankly. I'll just say high level, I understand the impetus. I mean, it is objectively true that, our regulations were constructed and geared at regulating traditional development impacts and not restoration. So I understand the desire to do that, to facilitate, our agency is putting out a lot of money, to do this kind of work. So our interest is to get that work done for sure.
Yeah.
Whether a general permit or some existing framework we have is the best to move that forward, I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting proposal.
Absent that bill moving forward, we would hope that this would have some added capacity for our staff to focus in on those projects. That's part of the hope of having a clear jurisdictional boundary is saving some time that we can look at these more complex, higher risk projects going forward.
And
One last.
I was just going to finish up on that question. The one thing I am excited about when thinking about restoration projects and dam removals in particular that trigger, a stream alteration review and permit more often than not is there's three different, a big issue is sediment management. How much do you leave? Can you leave it? What's the cost to move it? And every site's got its unique characteristics and fact patterns. So there's three different Lake Champlain Basin program funded research projects just now spinning up to look at the sediment management dam removals. I'm really excited that could help us add provisions in Jaren's general permit. He has an existing general permit. Do we need a new one? Or could we use some of the lessons learned from the research to just optimize for restoration his existing general permit?
Yeah.
And we're also, we just got under contract a consulting firm in the Rivers program to build out restoration project technical guidance for partners that will, hopefully facilitate, moving these projects along more quickly. And sediment management for dam removals is top of the list, top priority to build out first. We just had our kickoff meeting with the consultant last week. So yeah, we get it. We want to partner. But in terms of the bill, yeah, I wait till somebody else, I think from the agency, can speak to that more.
And what's the timeline on that research? Do you know?
18 months to a couple of years, depending on the project. I'd have to go back and look at the proposals and what was ultimately funded. I'm on the technical advisory committee for one of them, so I had some emails that I could look at there. But
And then one last one, the map you showed us, you would make that available to the public so that they could, in essence, at least begin to do their own jurisdictional decision making.
yeah, we actually have these maps there that they chop the stream segments up into additional thresholds, but on our river management webpage, you can go and select your town and get this information right now. And it's on the last slide of the slide deck is that link where people can go in there. We created that, I think, right after Act 138.
That's a very important question as well, is mapping of the perennial streams. There's not a good correlation of any of the available data with what is perennial, not well enough to make those remote determinations, but we do have drainage areas. So we could, in a matter of a few days, say, this is the drainage area threshold, and make that a layer available to the home.
Representative Sakowitz.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally understand why you want to move from perennial to an area. That makes a lot of sense, and the presentation's been really clear. Just want to get back to that 0.5 number that Representative Chapin was focused on. When I see numbers that end in 5 or 0, I grow very suspicious that there was some guesswork involved and it's kind of a rounding of some sort. And I know you said that the number was not arbitrary, but I just wanted to follow up a bit about where the number came from. And because I can sort of imagine, tell me if this is totally wrong or right, but that someone thought, well, maybe 0.5 sounds about right. And then you kind of look at all your stuff and the things that would go into your decision making. You're like, okay, yeah, it seems to jive very well with that. Or you could do it in the other direction where you say, here are all the things that are going to go into our decision. What number does that lead us to? And it seems like that would be unlikely to lead you to exactly 0.5. And so I'm just kind of get a sense of like what kind of process you went through and how, if could that number really be 0.6? It should it have been 0.4? Like, and how would that affect the maps that we look at? Like, did you look at it through that kind of lens of what will be the effect of changing that number a little bit one way or the other in terms of the ecological values of these spaces that we're affecting, how much space it would take up and things like that?
So that's a little before my time, so I can't speak to the exact methodology. We'll have to go back and do our research. The exact number that comes to mind, though, is like 318 acres or 315 acres, which is within 1/100th of a square mile to that 0.5. So it's absolutely rounded. I have no illusion that was not a number that was rounded to. But my understanding is
I find that rounding acceptable.
it was looked at first based on the USGS data and the consensus from our colleagues at Fish and Wildlife, and that's why we arrived at that. Is it conveniently 0.5? Yes, and that is something we like, to be perfectly frank, as it's a nice manageable number.
So it sounds like it is somewhat of a coincidence that it just happens to be this nice round number. That's what you're saying.
Right. If it was
That's-
like 289 acres, we probably would have said 300 acres instead of 0.035 square miles or something. We've tried to make that number as round as possible for regulatory purposes.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Representative.
But I wasn't getting mine.
Representative Chapin, you had a question too? Okay.
Can you just describe, the general permit versus the individual permit? What that, when a project triggers one or the other? And this will affect both of those permits, is that right?
So, the general main distinction is the general permit has outlined specific projects already. So it is, for Bedminster Bank harboring, it is stream crossings. It is, waves, or no, it's, gravel removal. So removal of gravel bars. There's a few items that are very specifically highlighted in our general permit. However, if you are outside of those or you are doing those and it's particularly high risk, then we put it to the individual permit. So the technical standards are by and large the same, and they are both beholden to the statutory standards. But there's just a select group of activities under that general permit that move through a faster process.
Representative Austin.
Yep. This is kind of a little bit off, but I'm just wondering, is there any way to size the culverts to help animals crossing? Will FEMA allow a larger culvert? If maybe let large animals be able to cross, use it as a crossing?
I can't speak to the FEMA funding. The sizing requirements that we have are largely based on passage of sediment, wood, and hydraulic capacity to make sure that those are not unnaturally grading or degrading up and downstream. However, there is process and a program at Fish and Wildlife for terrestrial animals as well. And I know V-Trans works closely with them. I'm not sure how prioritizes into those items, but we don't prescribe terrestrial crossings as part of these. So
Fish passage is your focus.
Fish passage.
Yeah.
Representative North.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rob and Jared, for this. It's extremely informative. I really like these colored charts with the streams. That's super helpful. So the proposal in Act in H 632 reduces the number of stream miles by about 13,000. Right. So we've looked at this, and you helped us look at this through the lens of kind of bureaucratic jurisdictional staffing and what like that. We kind of talked about the lens of ecological. I'm wondering about through the lens, and I don't know if you have the data, but to be able to look at this through the lens of the property owner and the costs to the property owner of permitting and construction permits and whatnot. Do you have any data that would indicate that those 13,000 miles based on the property is owned by them? What would be the likely cost avoidance, I would say, to property owners by reducing from 23,000 miles down to the 10,500 stream miles?
I'm not aware of any analysis we've done, so it's a very interesting question. I wish I had the answer to, but yeah, I don't think we've noodled that comprehensively statewide.
Yeah, and you would have to kind of rack up design costs into that, and that's a really squishy number.
I would imagine so, especially as you get way up into the smaller and smaller stream water portions. But do you have numbers that kind of on average what the permitting and the fees associated and the costs associated with permitting or not permitting?
So for a non-emergency activity, there's a flat fee of $200 under the general permit, $350 under the individual permit. But that is purely for the administrative cost. It does not account for the necessary technical expertise, either by the landowner or we're selecting.
And the engineer. You probably wouldn't have any numbers on the total cost typically experienced by the landowner to meet a permit.
No, I would just say a principal engineer is probably about $200 an hour.
And just worth reminding again that about half of the permits on average being those emergency protective or next flood measures, we don't assess a fee for those. You know, we don't penalize a town or landowner for the flood pain they just experienced. So there's a lot of permits we issue, but we don't collect a fee for those. Thank you.
Further questions on this part of the presentation? Good to keep going.
Good questions. Flip it over to Jaren here to kind of talk through the next few slides.
Yeah, so we're not much we're not very far from the end here, so it's
A few.
yeah, just a couple slides here, recap of what a regulatory workload looks like, particularly during flood times past 24, 36 months here. And then a bit of where we hope change in statute would benefit not only our team, but our municipal partners as well. So for context, since July of 2023, we've had 7 declared disasters. And that's flooding disasters, that is, and that's resulted in about 1,662 permits issued from our program. We figure there's 4 to 5 technical touch points or site visits per permit issued, and about the same fold again for technical assistance. So we're talking about 7,500 site visits over the past 2 years and 35,000 or so technical assistance calls, which it certainly adds up, and during those emergency times can come up the works. So this is really where we want to focus in on, and that's, what clarity can we provide? That's been a huge challenge for our municipal partners who go out and do work to repair their roads, but it's insufficiently done. It's done well, and it's a jurisdictional stream. So we have to go in and say that's not the appropriate size structure. Otherwise, if an appropriately sized structure is put in, it is not FEMA reimbursable. So we are having those touch points on all of these federally eligible projects, all projects in general, but it's particularly time sensitive when it comes to the federal reimbursement process. So with that clarity on jurisdiction, we would hope that towns can then advance knowing where they lie jurisdictionally, and move to either the correct project initially or seek an alternate project initially, as opposed to putting in a temporary measure, just minimizing the amount of cost that a town lays out before they are reimbursed. With drainage area threshold, we touched upon this already. We then can make these calls remotely. So of the number of site visits we conducted, we figure about a third of those are for jurisdictional determinations and don't have additional work that goes with it, at least at the time of that site visit. So we would hope over that, the past 36 months here, instead of having 7,500 site visits, we have somewhere on the order of 5,000. We figure that save a significant amount of time to put our resources elsewhere.
Do you have a sense of how many of those permits wouldn't have been needed, or required, I should say? The 662 permits,
Of those that would not be required.
if you had this new threshold.
Well, we do not measure the drainage area threshold associated with those permits because the jurisdiction isn't based on a drainage area currently. So we don't have.
Yeah. But do you have a GIS database of the permits and where they're located?
We have a database, but it is not currently connected to a GIS resource.
That's on the wish and to-do list, along with building out some field mapping tools for his team.
But we would figure below that half square mile, maybe a third of projects. That's a real rough guess at the moment.
Third would be,
Would not be jurisdiction. To us, there's still multiple jurisdictions that still apply. First, right upstream pricing. And this just recaps on the time savings we hope to have with our section. So again, 30% spent on site visits, and probably 20% of those are jurisdictional determinations. So we hope to save a couple hundred hours over the course of 2 years, or a couple hundred hours each year that we could then look at larger, more complex projects or higher risk projects.
Representative Austin.
Thank you. Do you have any kind of future predictions of flooding?
Mhm.
And what it would entail and what the cost will be?
No, so that would be a good question for colleagues at Vermont Emergency Management, who also work with the PA process as well. But what we can say is over the past 15 years, we've had a major flood declaration about every 8.5 months.
8.5 months?
I think she's testified in front of this committee before, but the state climatologist has some great graphs, Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux, in terms of kind of the increasing frequency of heavy precipitation events. Climate change is here, it's not in the abstract anymore. Every summer, we're just, we got lucky last summer. Lucky is kind of qualified there. It was a severe drought, but in terms of giving us some breathing room, we just had the very localized devastating flooding up in the Northeast Kingdom. But we're prepared for devastating at least regional scale flooding every year. I mean, that's what we're expecting. And again, what was that? 7 declarations over, what period was that?
Yeah, it was like 25 months. No, that was like 14 months.
Yeah, it was like 14 months, 7 declarations. I mean, we had declarations that were, the off season, right? In the winter.
So I remember during Irene, there was sort of like you all would kind of deputize people that you work with regularly to help assist. Is that process formalized, or how does it work when we get an overwhelming flood event that it's not possible for your 5 engineers to cover?
Yeah, we didn't formalize that as much as we would have liked. We did put that back in practice with some staff that helped us during Irene when the 23 floods hit. What we realized, though, that to really get technical horsepower on the ground quickly was to get consultants under a master contract. So we have 3 different water resources engineering firms now under a retainer contract to help us with post-flood work. So yeah, we kind of just went to private-public partnership there.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's good to know. Somebody else had Representative Sacklitz.
Yeah, I'm following up on Austin's question about the damage and what we expect. It seems like since Irene, we've had a lot of damage, but we've learned to put things back together in ways which mitigate having to do so again and again. And it seems like a lot of those repairs were done such that we've had big floods in those same spots afterwards and had the infrastructure get through really well. So I'm wondering, over time, it seems like we should see, even though we're seeing increasing numbers of storms, we should also see more resilient infrastructure. And so are we going to start getting to a spot where like the damage has been done and fixed and upgraded, and then we're going to be in at least a better place? I mean, we'll never catch up. We'll never, but are we kind of closing that gap over time in a significant way?
That's another great question yes, kind of that bending that curve towards more resilience. On one hand, yes. On the other hand, I wish I don't have, and maybe Jaren has the number, there's that great web page, the Vermont Culverts web page. I think our regional planning commissions put together that is, puts together the full kind of suite number of culverts around the state. And it's a tremendous number. I mean, I feel like it's in the
80 and 90,000.
1,000 structures. So there's still a lot of work to be done, I guess I would say. So there's that. And how many of that universe have we upsized to be more resilient and past sediment, wood and ice? I don't have that answer, but it's a great question. The other question that I just wonder about, again, with what is the future flood, 50 years from now? What we're designing for now, is that the design flood that's appropriate for sizing a structure 50 years from now, when the polar ice caps are even smaller than they are today? So it's a big question. It's a great question.
Okay, so there's 2 things I'd like to put a finer point on what the future flood looks like. There are studies out of UVM that are focused in on the Mad River watershed, so we have to extrapolate that to other basins, but they suggest that a 100-year storm event is going to be 30% more frequent and 30% greater within the next 50 or 60 years. So that's what you can expect is these storms are getting larger. So while we are building more robust, we can't really predict what that storm's gonna look like, or if we get a storm like St. Johnsbury and Linden had in 2024, we don't have the physical horsepower machines big enough to move the stones at that stream pass. That you would need to protect that infrastructure. So at best, you can put it back to a better state, but you're never going to be able to protect from that magnitude of flood. And then the other item I want to touch upon is, while we are reconstructing these more robustly, what we really want to do is not reconstruct them initially and then reconstruct them more robustly. That's an additional cost on taxpayers, and much of that isn't reimbursable. And we would hope that being able to clarify jurisdiction early, or have a reference for towns to look at early on, can help stem some of that reinvestment or misuse, or say misuse, but not the best use of funds of dollars.
But that was a UVM study, the future,
Yes, that is Bombley's in 2019 or 2021 around that.
and it was a 50-year timeframe?
Yes, I would say both me, but I do not recall
I
it.
just wanted to make sure
Yeah, it's like 30% larger and 30% more frequently.
and this makes me want to ask, repeat damages on roads. I know it's not necessarily your area, but you might know, are towns tracking them? And is V-Trans tracking them? And, or are you tracking them? I mean, it's, well, many of us live in towns that go back to the same spots year over year.
So, yes, to all of the above, but it's not as comprehensive as we would like. We have new databases on our side to hopefully track that going into the future. Vermont Emergency Management, where they have been declared disasters and the federal dollars have been spent, they have that tracked. V-Trans has some history of that as well. And at the town level, it can be a bit of a scattershot. Some towns are really good about tracking it, others, they just don't have the staff to commit those sort of administrative services.
Yeah.
FEMA used to track it. I don't know if they still do. After Irene, we got a data set from them for public assistance funded projects, which again, by and large, transportation. And it was like 15,000 points on the Vermont map from over about a 13-year period. And a lot of those dots were stacked on top of each other. That was before they acknowledged our stream alteration as codes and standards and started paying for upsized bridges and culverts. I don't know if they're still tracking that. They're a skeleton crew down in Boston, not sharing much information these days, so.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, time, maybe.
You mentioned a number of 80 to 90,000, I think, of structures that either need to be replaced or damaged.
That's total inventory
An inventory.
on municipal roads.
Can you tell me how many of those 80 or 90,000 are just culverts that need to be upsized from, say, 12 to 18 or 24 inches?
Might be something in that body of work that the regional planning commissions did to stand up that Vermont culverts page. I just haven't been there in a while.
Do you have numbers of how many culverts have been replaced each year since some of these catastrophic floods, say in 23 and 24?
Not at our fingertips.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's something, well, we would have to,
we have permit numbers we've issued. There's also V-Trans.
yes, we'd have to code that out to find that.
Yeah.
But I would guess about half of those permits issued during that time period were crossings. So that would be on the order of 800 structures that came up to current size and standards.
Okay, because 80 or 90,000 sounds like a lot, but I can't remember the exact number of town highway departments we have, but I don't know how many they actually each get replaced every year. So that number could be shrinking. If it's just simply culverts, could be shrinking pretty rapidly.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point, is that number does not discriminate between our jurisdiction and municipal roads, general permit jurisdiction, or anything that any municipal inventory mandatory zone there regardless of. jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, that there's a lot of culverts that don't carry a stream, right? It's just road drainage cross culverts. But ultimately, at some point, outfall to a stream, so that's part of that large number that is outside of our jurisdiction.
That is part of our technical follow-up with
Yeah.
our federal partners, though, is we generally have to waive jurisdiction on all those for town.
That number sounds very large. That's why I,
Yeah, I know.
just to somebody who's not, doesn't have a lot of information, that could sound like a number you're never gonna reach.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you. When I first saw that number, when I visited the website the first time, I was taken aback, to be sure. Any other comments on this? I think we're about, you want to do, Jared likes to do quick math. He's an engineer.
I was
He's good at quick math. He's good at doing it in his head, but he's also.
I mean,
good-
that's 340 culverts a town. That's totally within the realm of possible.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, because you get a talented crew who knows what they're doing and they can get the road closed, they can get a bunch of culverts done.
Yeah.
Somewhere around, 13,000 roadway miles in the state. And yeah, 300 culverts you said per town. That sounds right.
I mean, there's definitely a capital budgeting component to it, leaning on the FEMA funding and capitalizing, as it were, on the flood recovery funding. Towns really lean on that, just because during the blue sky years, the budgets can only do but so much.
That's a bigger hill to climb than getting them replaced.
For sure.
Questions for river management team? Representative Chapin.
Just going back to the 10 cubic yards. How do you feel about the size of 10 cubic yards? Should we be reconsidering that? And do you have the data to help us just understand sort of how many do you have the data of projects per, if you cut up how many cubic yards per project? Is that data you have that you could show us sort of to help us to the scale?
We don't have that number, sorry.
That would be nothing apples to oranges. You'd have buckets, I guess.
Yeah, and
But how do you feel about that size?
I
Years of-
think, as we touched on earlier, it depends on the size of the watershed. If you are talking about 4 or 5 cubes of material out of the main stem of the Winooski down here, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. But if you are on one of these, streams that are 6 to 8 feet wide, and you pull out 10 yards of material, you can. So, the scale approach is very logical.
I guess I'd just say, I think there'd be some interest in this committee to understand all these tiny little projects in large streams, and could we be looking at both ends of the spectrum rather than just high up in the hills?
Can't speak to where that 10 cubic yard came from. That was with the initial drafting of 1021.
Been around for long, since we came on board.
That was scaled to that square miles, which is why when you spoke to scaling it, I
And tens of
immediately thought you're going
tens
small.
and fives.
Tens and fives, yeah. Feels good, right?
Representative Tagliavia.
Just for those of us in the committee and maybe people listening online, 10 cubic yards is if you see dump trucks going down the road, tandem dump trucks, that is not a full load for one truck.
Yeah.
They are 14 yards legal limit. I guarantee you, when there's an emergency, those suckers are not going legal. Not, and in a good way, because they get a job done.
And the material plumps when you excavate. So 10 yards,
Yes.
10 yards in a string is just about done. Just about 13, 14 yards.
Yeah, the density, you get a lesser density when you disturb it, right?
Right.
Huh. Well, this was really informative. Thank you very much. And thanks for your work. Not seeing any further question. One more.
Just to follow up on the 10 cubic yards and being connected to that 10 square miles, like if
Yeah.
that really was the connection, then that number seems to really be way too big now that we're lowering the threshold for the drainage area, as you indicated, that it would make a big difference in the smaller streams. That does sound like something that
Something
we should be
we should
paying
pursue.
attention to.
Yeah, I think we would be interested. I mean, I realize it would be very interesting to follow that thread on the scale impacts on smaller streams and what does make sense. What is a disturbance in one of the 0.5 square mile areas of jurisdiction?
Do have a bit of the back of the envelope on that.
You have a bit of the back.
Bit of the back of the envelope on that. So any structure on a perennial stream is going to require fish passage. And to do that, the structure generally needs to be embedded. So if you are embedding the structure 2 feet below stream bed, and it's a 6 foot wide stream, and your standard roadway right of way is going to have a 40-foot structure, you're talking about 16 cubic yards of disturbance to put in a structure like that just below a stream grade or below disturbance.
Right.
So that's kind of what you're looking at is any stream crossing, adequate stream crossing is going to exceed 10 cubic yards regardless of the drainage area once you're above a 6 foot wide stream.
Love it. I guess what I'm thinking is more, what is the amount of disturbance that is potentially going to disrupt the equilibrium condition in the smaller streams?
That sounds like research.
It does. It sounds really interesting to me. Might be what I should do in my summer vacation.
Yeah. You know, Chair knows this with your background. I mean, depending on landscape context, you don't have to do much to trigger adjustments in the stream that can cause it to unravel, start, you know, head cuts migrating upstream, impacting stability and infrastructure. So it's a good question.
We'll find out. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Appreciate having us. So.
Okay, members, Pat sent out a list of witnesses we've heard from already. We're gonna follow bill. We had a drafting request with a bill number. We're gonna walk through that on Tuesday with Michael O'Grady. Be really good for you to do a little bit of homework and look at who we've already heard from. If you need to refresh on their testimony, I would not, I think it'd be good if we didn't invite everyone back and redo what the work we've done. So let's do some homework on that. And also you received in your email the list of reports that we have had submitted over the whole biennium. I would like you to look at those and see which ones pique your interest and read it and come back with some sort of a summary for the committee. So that's your homework assignment for your long weekend. Representative Moore.
Thanks, Chair. Just question on the bottom bill, is it basically still in the same state as we left it from last year? So we're just picking up where we left off.
Yes.
We were looking at.
Picking up where we
We
left
can just
off.
go back and look at what.
Draft request 25-0091. But it's up under Michael O'Grady's name in many places now. Like,
Even in the current year.
yeah, yes, Kat's been posting it.
Okay.
Like when Matt Chapman came in yesterday or whenever it came in,
Very good.
it should be there.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we're adjourned.